In my years observing the Westminster corridors, I have witnessed how power, unchecked, transforms even the most well-intentioned souls into tyrants. Yet I have also seen how excessive checks can paralyze governance itself. The art lies not in creating mechanical barriers, but in cultivating what I call the moral constitution, that delicate balance where institutional wisdom restrains passion, where tradition guides innovation, and where the parts work in harmony to preserve the whole. Today's Americans face challenges I once saw brewing: an executive grown too bold, a legislature too partisan, and a people too quick to abandon the patient work of constitutional government for the false promises of revolutionary change. The original conservative framework of checks and balances offers something far more sophisticated than mere institutional rivalry. It provides the architecture of ordered liberty itself. This is not merely political theory but the accumulated wisdom of centuries of human struggle to balance freedom with order, energy with restraint, and popular will with constitutional wisdom. Chapter 1: The Organic Constitution, Beyond Mechanical Balance. True constitutional balance cannot be achieved through mere mechanical separation, like clockwork springs pushing against each other. During my decades in Parliament, I observed that the most effective checks emerged not from written rules, but from what I term the organic constitution, those living traditions, conventions, and moral restraints that grow naturally from a people's experience with governance. The Americans, in their wisdom, understood this when they crafted their constitution. They did not merely divide power, they created a system where different institutions would naturally develop different perspectives, different loyalties, and different ways of understanding the public good. The House reflects immediate popular will, the Senate embodies deliberative wisdom, and the executive provides energetic action, each checking the others not through opposition, but through the creative tension of complementary virtues. This organic approach recognizes that constitutions are not mathematical formulas but living instruments that must adapt to circumstances while preserving fundamental principles. I witnessed in Britain how our unwritten constitution proved more durable than France's written declarations precisely because it could bend without breaking, evolving through precedent rather than revolutionary upheaval. The French revolutionaries, intoxicated by abstract theories of perfect government, destroyed in months what centuries of gradual development had built. The danger lies in treating checks and balances as ends in themselves rather than means to good governance. When institutional rivalry becomes more important than the common good, when procedure trumps prudence, the very mechanisms designed to preserve liberty become instruments of its destruction. I have observed how constitutional forms can persist even as their spirit dies, how legislators can follow every rule while abandoning every principle, how executives can respect every procedural limit while violating every moral boundary. The true conservative framework recognizes that constitutional balance requires not just structural separation, but moral virtue in those who operate the machinery of government. Without public-spirited citizens willing to place constitutional duty above personal advantage, the most ingenious system of checks becomes mere theater. The founders understood this, which is why they spoke not just of constitutional mechanics but of republican virtue, the civic character necessary to make constitutional government work. Consider how this operates in practice. The Senate's advice and consent power over appointments serves not merely as a check on executive power, but as a mechanism for ensuring that public officials possess both competence and character. The impeachment power exists not just to remove corrupt officials, but to maintain the moral standards that constitutional government requires. These are not mechanical processes but moral exercises that depend on the virtue of those who exercise them. Chapter 2: The Danger of Democratic Despotism, Why Popular Will Needs Restraint. My observations of the French revolutionary madness reveal the truth that many democratic enthusiasts refuse to acknowledge: unchecked popular will can become the most terrible form of tyranny. The people, when seized by passion and led by demagogues, can destroy in moments what centuries of prudent governance have built. This is not because the people are inherently evil, but because popular sovereignty, like any form of power, requires constitutional channels to prevent its corruption. This is why the founders of the American system, influenced by my warnings about democratic excess, created not a pure democracy but a constitutional republic. They understood that the majority can be as tyrannical as any monarch, perhaps more so because it claims the sanction of popular sovereignty. The Senate, with its longer terms and state representation, serves as what I call a cooling chamber, allowing popular passion to be tempered by deliberative wisdom. The Electoral College itself represents this principle. It prevents the raw aggregation of votes from determining the presidency, instead requiring candidates to build geographically diverse coalitions that respect the federal character of the Union. This is not an antiquated obstacle to democracy but a sophisticated recognition that good governance requires more than counting heads. It forces aspiring leaders to appeal to the whole nation, not just its most populous centers. I have seen how quickly popular assemblies can descend into mob rule when freed from institutional restraints. The French National Assembly, intoxicated by abstract theories of popular sovereignty, destroyed the very foundations of civil society in the name of the people's will. They abolished ancient institutions, confiscated property, and ultimately consumed their own revolution in an orgy of violence, all while claiming to represent the general will. The American system, by contrast, channels popular energy through multiple filters, electoral systems, federal structures, and constitutional limitations that preserve both liberty and order. The House of Representatives provides immediate popular representation, but its power is balanced by a Senate that represents states rather than mere population, by an independently elected president who serves the whole nation, and by courts that protect constitutional principles against temporary majorities. The conservative framework recognizes that the people's ultimate sovereignty must be exercised through institutions that cultivate wisdom rather than merely reflecting passion. This is not elitism but prudence, the recognition that good intentions cannot substitute for constitutional wisdom developed over generations of human experience. The most dangerous political leaders are often those who claim to speak directly for the people while bypassing the constitutional institutions that channel and moderate popular will. True democracy requires not just majority rule but constitutional protection for minority rights, not just popular sovereignty but institutional wisdom, not just electoral accountability but moral responsibility. The genius of the American system lies in its recognition that democracy can preserve itself only by accepting constitutional limits on its own power. Chapter 3: Legislative Wisdom, the Art of Representation Beyond Delegation. True representation, as I learned through decades in Parliament, involves far more than merely echoing the immediate desires of one's constituents. A representative is not a delegate bound by instructions, but a trustee exercising judgment for the good of the whole. This distinction forms the heart of the conservative approach to legislative checks and balances, and it remains as relevant today as when I first articulated it to the electors of Bristol. When I told those electors that their representative owes them his judgment, not his obedience, I articulated a principle essential to constitutional government. If legislators merely reflect popular opinion, they become redundant. If they ignore it entirely, they become tyrants. The art lies in the creative tension between popular will and prudential judgment, honoring the source of one's authority while exercising the wisdom necessary to serve the common good. The American Congress, properly understood, embodies this principle through its bicameral structure. The House, with shorter terms and smaller districts, remains closer to immediate popular sentiment. Its members face the voters every 2 years, ensuring responsiveness to changing public opinion. Yet even the House is not a mere echo chamber of popular will. Its members are expected to deliberate, to consider evidence, to weigh competing claims, and to exercise judgment. The Senate, with longer terms and statewide constituencies, encourages broader perspective and longer-term thinking. This is not an accident but intelligent design, creating space for both responsive representation and deliberative wisdom. Senators can afford to take unpopular positions when principle demands it, knowing they have 6 years to explain their reasoning to voters. This temporal distance from electoral pressure allows for the kind of statesmanship that immediate democracy often prevents. Consider how this framework operates during national crises. Popular passion may demand immediate action, but institutional checks require deliberation. The very friction between branches that critics condemn as inefficiency often prevents precipitous policies that would cause lasting harm. I have witnessed how quickly democratic enthusiasm can turn destructive when not channeled through prudent institutional filters. The committee system exemplifies legislative wisdom in action. Rather than deciding complex issues through immediate floor votes, Congress channels legislation through committees where expertise can be developed, evidence can be gathered, and competing interests can be heard. This process may slow decision-making, but it improves the quality of decisions by ensuring that legislative judgment is informed by both popular will and expert knowledge. The conservative framework recognizes that good representation requires representatives who understand their role as guardians of constitutional tradition while remaining accountable to the people. This balance cannot be achieved through mechanical rules but requires the cultivation of civic virtue, the recognition that public service is a trust, not an opportunity for personal advancement or ideological warfare. When legislators see themselves as warriors in a permanent campaign rather than trustees of constitutional government, the system breaks down. Chapter 4: Executive Energy and Constitutional Restraint, the Paradox of Limited Power. The executive presents the greatest challenge to constitutional balance, for it must possess energy sufficient to govern effectively while remaining subject to constitutional restraint. My experience with both strong and weak executives taught me that neither unfettered power nor paralyzing limitation serves the public good. The art lies in creating what I call energetic restraint, executive power that is both vigorous and constitutional. During my time observing George III and his ministers, I saw how executive power could be misused when freed from proper constitutional checks. The attempt to tax America without representation illustrated how even well-intentioned rulers can become tyrannical when they lose touch with constitutional tradition and popular sentiment. The king and his ministers believed they were acting for the good of the empire, yet their policies drove the American colonists to revolution because they violated fundamental principles of constitutional government. Yet I also witnessed the paralysis that results when executive authority becomes so constrained that decisive action becomes impossible. Weak executives cannot protect the nation from foreign threats, cannot execute the laws faithfully, and cannot provide the energy that effective government requires. The challenge is to create executive power that is both limited and effective, both accountable and energetic. The American presidency represents a sophisticated solution to this dilemma. Unlike the British system, where executive power emerges from legislative confidence, the American president derives authority directly from the people through the Electoral College. This independence allows for executive energy while maintaining constitutional accountability through impeachment, judicial review, and legislative oversight. The key insight is that executive power must be both limited and effective. The president can act decisively within constitutional bounds but cannot exceed those bounds without facing institutional resistance. This is not the mechanical separation that political theorists often describe, but the organic balance that emerges when institutions develop complementary roles within a common constitutional framework. The veto power exemplifies this balance. The president can check legislative overreach while remaining subject to legislative override. This creates a dynamic tension that forces both branches to seek broad consensus for major policy changes. Neither can govern alone, but together they can provide both energy and restraint, both innovation and continuity. I have observed how executive tyranny often begins with the claim of emergency powers that somehow suspend normal constitutional limitations. The conservative framework insists that constitutional principles become more, not less, important during crises. True executive energy operates within law, not above it, finding creative solutions that preserve both effectiveness and constitutional integrity. The danger lies in false choices between energy and limitation. The conservative approach recognizes that properly limited power is often more effective than unlimited power because it enjoys greater legitimacy and popular support. When executives respect constitutional bounds, their actions carry greater moral authority and encounter less resistance. Chapter 5: Judicial Independence and Constitutional Interpretation, the Guardians of Law. The judiciary occupies a unique position in the constitutional order, serving as both the interpreter of law and the guardian of constitutional tradition. My observations of legal systems across the British Empire taught me that judicial independence is essential not just for protecting individual rights, but for maintaining the rule of law that makes ordered liberty possible. Without independent courts, constitutional government becomes impossible because there is no impartial arbiter to resolve disputes between branches or between government and citizens. The American system of lifetime tenure for federal judges, while appearing to insulate them from democratic accountability, actually serves democratic purposes by protecting constitutional principles from temporary majorities. I have witnessed how quickly popular passion can demand the sacrifice of fundamental rights when faced with perceived threats. Independent judges, grounded in legal precedent and constitutional text, provide essential continuity that preserves the framework within which democratic politics can safely operate. This independence must be balanced with proper restraint. Judges who see themselves as philosopher kings, free to impose their personal visions of justice, become as dangerous to constitutional government as tyrannical executives or mob-like legislatures. The conservative approach to judicial power emphasizes interpretation over creation, understanding the judge's role as discovering and applying legal principles rather than inventing them. The power of judicial review, while not explicitly granted in the constitutional text, emerges naturally from the judicial function. When laws conflict with constitutional principles, courts must choose which authority to follow. By choosing constitutional law over ordinary legislation, they preserve the hierarchical structure that makes constitutional government possible. This power serves not judicial aggrandizement but constitutional preservation. Yet this power must be exercised with what I call judicial prudence, the recognition that courts should intervene only when constitutional violations are clear and that democratic processes should generally be allowed to work. The tension between judicial independence and democratic accountability requires constant calibration, not mechanical rules. Judges must be independent enough to protect constitutional principles but restrained enough to respect democratic self-government. The common law tradition, which both Britain and America inherited, provides a model for this balance. Common law develops through precedent, judicial decisions that build upon previous decisions while adapting to new circumstances. This evolutionary approach respects both continuity and change, both tradition and innovation. It allows legal development without revolutionary disruption. The conservative framework recognizes that judicial independence serves not judicial aggrandizement but constitutional preservation, maintaining the legal foundations that allow democratic politics to flourish within ordered bounds. When courts protect constitutional rights, they protect the conditions necessary for democratic self-government. When they respect constitutional limits on their own power, they model the restraint that constitutional government requires from all its branches. Chapter 6: Federalism as Constitutional Architecture, Unity Through Diversity. The genius of American federalism lies not merely in dividing power between levels of government, but in creating a system where diversity strengthens rather than weakens the whole. My experience with imperial governance taught me that attempting to impose uniform administration across diverse territories inevitably breeds resentment and rebellion, while allowing local adaptation within common principles creates lasting unity. The American federal system represents the most sophisticated application of this principle in human history. The federal structure serves as perhaps the most sophisticated check in the American system. State governments provide laboratories for policy experimentation, allowing different approaches to emerge and compete. This competitive federalism prevents the stagnation that often afflicts centralized systems while maintaining sufficient unity for common defense and commerce. When states try different approaches to similar problems, the results provide empirical evidence about what works and what doesn't, allowing successful policies to spread and failed policies to be abandoned. I witnessed firsthand how British attempts to impose uniform taxation and administration on America destroyed the imperial relationship that had flourished when colonial assemblies enjoyed substantial autonomy. The Stamp Act, the Tea Act, and other measures designed to bring the colonies under tighter imperial control violated the principle of local self-government that Americans had come to cherish. The lesson was clear: political unity requires constitutional space for local diversity. The American founders, many of whom had participated in these imperial struggles, designed a system that could maintain union while preserving the local self-government that Americans valued. The Constitution grants specific powers to the federal government while reserving all others to the states and the people. This division is not arbitrary but reflects careful consideration of which functions require national coordination and which can be better handled locally. The 10th Amendment embodies this principle, reserving to states and people all powers not explicitly granted to the federal government. This is not mere legal technicality but constitutional wisdom, recognizing that government closer to the people is generally more responsive and accountable, while acknowledging that certain functions require national coordination. Defense, foreign relations, and interstate commerce require national authority, while education, local law enforcement, and most domestic policies can be handled more effectively by state and local governments. Modern challenges to federalism often reflect impatience with the messiness of diverse approaches and the desire for uniform solutions to complex problems. Yet this apparent inefficiency is actually a strength, preventing the accumulation of errors that centralized systems cannot easily correct. When all authority is concentrated in one place, mistakes become universal. When authority is distributed, mistakes remain local and can be corrected through competition and experimentation. The conservative framework sees federalism not as an obstacle to effective governance but as its essential foundation, creating the constitutional space where prudent experimentation can flourish within traditional bounds while maintaining the unity necessary for national strength and prosperity. Chapter 7: Applying Burkean Balance to Contemporary American Governance. The principles I have outlined remain as relevant today as when America's founders first struggled to create a government energetic enough to govern effectively yet limited enough to preserve liberty. Contemporary challenges, from executive overreach to legislative dysfunction to judicial activism, reflect the eternal tension between power and restraint that constitutes the heart of constitutional government. The solution lies not in abandoning the constitutional framework but in restoring the spirit that makes it work. Today's executive branch has accumulated powers that would have alarmed the founders, not through constitutional amendment but through the gradual expansion of emergency authorities, administrative agencies, and congressional delegation. The conservative response is not to eliminate executive energy but to restore constitutional boundaries through legislative oversight, judicial review, and popular accountability. The presidency must remain strong enough to execute the laws faithfully while remaining subject to the constitutional checks that prevent tyranny. The growth of the administrative state presents particular challenges to constitutional balance. When executive agencies create rules that have the force of law, when they adjudicate disputes about those rules, and when they enforce their own decisions, the separation of powers breaks down. This concentration of legislative, judicial, and executive functions in the same hands violates the fundamental principle that power must be divided to prevent its abuse. Congressional dysfunction often reflects the decline of institutional norms that once channeled partisan competition toward productive ends. The solution lies not in eliminating partisanship, which is natural in free societies, but in restoring the procedural traditions and personal relationships that allow opposing parties to compete within constitutional bounds rather than treating each other as enemies of the republic. When legislators see their opponents as fellow citizens with different views rather than traitors to be destroyed, constitutional government becomes possible again. The federal system faces pressures from both directions, national problems that seem to require uniform solutions and local communities that resist distant control. The conservative approach seeks to preserve subsidiarity, handling problems at the most local level consistent with effective governance while maintaining national unity on truly national concerns. This requires careful judgment about which issues genuinely require national solutions and which can be left to state and local experimentation. The Supreme Court's role in this balance remains contentious, with critics on both sides arguing that unelected judges exercise too much power in a democratic system. The conservative response is neither to eliminate judicial review nor to grant courts unlimited power, but to restore the judicial restraint that allows democratic self-government to flourish within constitutional bounds. Courts should protect clear constitutional principles while allowing democratic processes to work on questions where the Constitution provides no clear guidance. Perhaps most importantly, the American system requires citizens who understand their role in maintaining constitutional balance. Checks and balances cannot work if voters reward politicians for breaking constitutional norms or punish them for exercising constitutional restraint. The ultimate check on government power remains an informed citizenry committed to constitutional principles rather than immediate gratification or partisan advantage. The conservative framework offers hope because it recognizes that constitutional government, while difficult, remains both possible and necessary for human flourishing in political community. The answer to contemporary challenges lies not in revolutionary change but in constitutional restoration, recovering the spirit of limited government, separated powers, and civic virtue that makes free government possible. Conclusion. The original conservative framework of checks and balances offers not a mechanical system of mutual obstruction, but an organic architecture of ordered liberty that has proven its worth through centuries of human experience. Through my years in Parliament and observation of constitutional development across the English-speaking world, I have learned that balance emerges not from perfect institutional design but from the cultivation of constitutional wisdom, the practical understanding that power must serve justice, that liberty requires order, and that innovation must respect tradition. America's founders created not a perfect system but a perfectible one, capable of growth and adaptation while preserving fundamental principles that protect human dignity and promote the common good. Your task as citizens is not to dismantle this inheritance in pursuit of efficiency or ideological purity, but to restore the constitutional spirit that makes balanced government possible. The choice before you remains what it has always been: the patient work of constitutional governance or the false promise of revolutionary shortcuts. Choose wisely, for upon your choice depends not just your own liberty, but the fate of constitutional government itself and the hopes of free people everywhere.